Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been said that good ideas start with brainstorming and that great ideas start with coffee. Today, we're here to talk about great ideas, innovation, and hot topics with fascinating guests from cardiology, medicine, and healthcare and beyond. I'm Dipti Itchhaporia, President of the American College of Cardiology, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual coffee table this morning. We look forward to an interactive session today, and I will say that we're going to be talking for the first 30 minutes with our two guests, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. So please feel free to have your question ready, because I would like for all of you to be able to have a question and connect with us. A reminder for virtual engagement: please remain muted when you're not speaking, and we encourage you to use the WebEx chat feature. At the end, we hope that when you join us for the question period, that if you're called upon, your camera ready, and so that we can chat with you by seeing who you are. If you're viewing this live on the WebEx application, click the layout button in the upper right corner under the stage view, select Stack for optimal experience. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two fascinating guests for today. The first is Dr. Kim Williams, and then our second guest is Dr. Uma Valeti. So Dr. Williams probably needs no introduction, but he's the chief of the Division of Cardiology at Rush University in Chicago. He serves as the Associate Dean for Faculty Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Rush University, where he really focuses on the recruitment and retention of underrepresented minorities and women. He's the past president of the American College of Cardiology, as well as past president of the American Society of Nuclear Cardiology, as well as the chairman of the board of directors of the Association of Black Cardiologists. He's the founder of the Urban Cardiology Initiative in Detroit, which aims to reduce ethnic heart care disparities and lead community-based efforts in Chicago at Rush. His professional focus is on preventative cardiology, specializing in synthesizing data on cardiovascular risk and mortality due to nutrition. He has become an internationally recognized speaker, including over 200 publications, online resources, movies, and lectures on the topic of cardiovascular cardionutrition. Dr. Williams was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Recognition from ASNC as its 2018 Mario Verani Lecture, and the German Cardiac Society at the 2019 Golden Key recipient in a keynote lecture. Dr. Williams has been a vegan since 2003 after being selected as incoming president for the American College of Cardiology. And actually in 2014, he became a vegan in 2003, but after he became president of the American College of Cardiology in 2014, he wrote a piece in Medscape about being a vegan and what the cardiovascular benefits are. And hopefully we're going to get a chance to touch on that. And he continues to maintain his enthusiasm about plant-based diets, and I really want to hear more about that and the cardiac benefits of removing dairy and animal products. So we'll welcome Dr. Williams. The next is Dr. Uma Valeti. He's a cardiologist who's turned into an entrepreneur. So Dr. Valeti is an interventional cardiologist that also was a cardiac imager, trained at Mayo Clinic, and then practiced at the University of Minnesota. And I know Uma because he was on the board of governors at the same time that I was for the ACC. He is now the founder and CEO of Upside Foods, the world's leading cultivated meat company producing meat directly from animal cells. Uma's vision kickstarted a real movement globally, and his team has pioneered the world's first multi-animal meat production platform which is sustainable and humane to people and the planet. Uma was listed as a global thinker of the decade by Foreign Policy magazine. He's an adjunct professor of cardiovascular medicine at Stanford University, a visionary, and a friend. Welcome, Dr. Valeti. So I'm really excited to talk to both of you about this topic. I mean, I've been really excited all month waiting for this coffee to occur. So I'm going to go to Dr. Williams first. You've been a vegan since 2003. We all read that piece that you wrote in Medscape in 2014. Tell me about that. Are you still a vegan? And some thoughts about your journey in this whole cardio nutrition field.
Well, thanks first of all for having me. It's an honor to be here. And I was just moving along with what was the so-called American Heart Association diet: chicken skin, without the skin, the fish, no, not fried. I found out that my cholesterol was elevated, and once that, I was never going to be as young as I was when I started this sentence. I know that, and so the cholesterol metabolism changed a little bit. And so what I ended up doing is researching where's the cholesterol coming from. And it turns out that chicken, fish, they have cholesterol, and maybe a little less than beef, but not that much. And so eliminated them from my diet. And 6 weeks later, my LDL was normal. Um, the interesting that phenomenon of, first of all, following the literature, it really has been amazing to see how nutrition has been related to mortality and cardiovascular events. And the data has become very thick. And so now I'm not just a vegan, but now I really do a whole food plant-based diet. And that's because it turns out that wonderful JACC publication from 2018 indicated that there are a lot of unhealthy vegan diets. And that if you're frying things, and if you're using a lot of white sugar, white rice, white flour, refined grains, you're actually putting yourself more at risk than you would be if you were eating an animal-laden diet. And so that sort of explains why when you look at vegetarian and vegan populations, you may not see the health benefits, because some of the things that are in those diets are really not that healthy.
Right. So we're going to come back and touch on this nutrition part. I want to go to Dr. Valeti for a second. So Uma, tell us about your journey. I mean, how do you go from becoming an interventional cardiologist, first of all, to do just imaging, leading a program in imaging, but then going to decide that we're going to give all that up, move from, Minnesota to California. Not that I argue about that part of it. I can see the merit of that, but coming to California and then running this company that's really been a movement.
Yeah, thank you, Dipti. First of all, I want to thank both Dipti and Kim. I served on the board of governors and the steering committee and Dipti was the chair, and then also Kim and you were the president of ACC in 2015 is when I founded, formerly known as Memphis Meats, but Upside Foods. So both of you are hugely inspirational, and I'm actually wearing my ACC jacket here today. I miss being part of the regular ACC conferences, but I'll tell you the simple reason why I started Upside Foods is this desire to be able to make a really meaningful difference in how food comes to the table. Honestly, to be able to say we can cure world hunger. As cardiologists, we've always been healers at the forefront, and the food system seemed to need a resuscitation. And in order to do that, we also had to keep an eye on the planet. And I think if you can do both, save the planet and also cure world hunger, is the biggest opportunity out there. And cardiologists, as you know, have really big ambitions. And I thought this would be the moment to start it. All the trends I was seeing in the world were aligned with it. I grew up in a meat eating family. I grew up in India and quit eating meat in medical school because I couldn't really, get behind how meat came to the table. And initially started off as, being intensely against confined animal agriculture. Subsequently saw the enormous environmental impact and, like the devastating impact on climate. And as I started going through cardiology and going to, Mayo Clinic, I made up my mind that I'll do everything I can to learn as much as I possibly can. And fortuitously, I started learning a lot about cardiovascular disease, the origins of it, but also got involved with stem cells and starting to understand the power of what we can do if we find the right cells to do the right things. That led me to starting to work on them, injecting them into patients' hearts when they had a heart attack. We did the late MI and MI trials sponsored by NHLBI at that time to regrow, LAD in myocardium. So that's where the idea came from of could you grow food from cells? That was my aha moment because I was injecting them into LADs and I couldn't get that thought out of my head. The more and more I looked into the field, it seemed like it had to be done. So that's the origin story of leaving cardiology, coming to California, thinking that we can positively impact billions of human lives and trillions of animal lives. So.
And so far, tell me so far how you guys are doing, because I know that this has really started a movement. There's a concept of cellular agriculture, and I actually wrote about that in my leadership page that's coming up. to sort of introduce people about cellular agriculture, because that's really what you're doing.
Absolutely. Look, this whole field did not exist 5 years ago. It was in the realm of science fiction and some small lab-based academic projects. So we were the first company in this space. It was incredibly challenging for anyone to believe in it. I'd say, less than 0.1% of the people, when I said I want to start this company, said, go ahead, don't look back. A few of them were Rick Nishimura, Bill Lindsay, a cardiac surgeon, and I talked to you, Dipti. So since then, we've got an incredible movement that has started. The field went from no companies in this space to about 100 companies globally, almost every meat-producing, meat-consuming country in the world. Nearly every major government wants to have this innovation be a part of their R&D, academic programs, and regulatory programs. There's undergrad and PhD programs in the field of cellular agriculture now. There's enormous media interest. There's not a single field in food in the last 5 decades that's grown as fast as this, with interest in media, governments, specifically for food safety and food security, and the opportunity to do so, given the timeliness of climate impact, real timeliness of consumer awareness of how meat comes to the table, and people wanting to know how their food's been treated. And lastly, this is what I'm really personally also motivated by, is the opportunity to make meat better. Can we make it healthier for us? So I think this field is just getting started.
Well, you just touched on something I really wanted to touch on. Talk to us about that, because, I just saw Dr. Williams perk up, right? When you say make meat healthier, I mean, talk to me about that. But before you do, let me just make sure. So you have been a vegan for 25 years, but you're no longer a vegan, correct?
I'll tell you, the qualifier is the following. The only meat I eat is the meat that we produce at Upside Foods. So Upside chicken, beef, and poultry, everything we make. For the simple reason, I can get behind that production method. I understand how it's produced. It's the cleanest way to produce meat ever. So that's the only meat I eat. So with the qualifier, vegan for 25 years, but not anymore, because I eat animal-based meat now that we produce.
Okay, and then Dr. Williams, you've been a vegan, but now you're more of a whole grain, plant-based guy rather than just a vegan per se, correct? And so,
yeah,
right. And we're all about nutrition, because that's what you're saying by saying I'm getting behind the whole foods plant-based. And then you're saying it's clean meat. So tell me about that, because we're really interested in knowing, can you make meat that's less atherogenic?
Are you asking me or Kim?
Well, let's ask you first, and then Kim, I'm sure, has a lot of thoughts about it.
Look, I wouldn't get into this if I didn't believe that. So I absolutely believe we can make meat less atherogenic, less prone to induce chronic disease, chronic inflammation, all of these.
So from my point of view, obviously, my issue was cholesterol. But I had measured my C-reactive protein, and it was normal, and it went to almost zero when I went vegan. So there are other things other than just cholesterol that it sounds like you're really going to make a big impact on, Uma, particularly the microbiome and the bacterial consequences in the gut of eating animal products the way they are now. The Cleveland Clinic data on TMAO, that's trimethylene N oxide. If anybody in the audience hasn't looked at that, just put it in your search engine. But there's a warning: if you read about TMAO, you're going to be vegan by the time you're done reading about it, because of the effect on heart attack, stroke, heart failure, death, and chronic kidney disease. And it's more than that. That is, the rumor was that all of the vegans were going to have less of a problem with COVID because we have lower levels of inflammation. Of course, that makes me think that we're all going to become, asymptomatic carriers. And to an extent, that's probably true. And now they're saying that the microbiome is responsible for the cytokine storm. So it sounds like you're going to cure all of those things and just leave those with a cholesterol problem. With questions, but everything else seems like it's going to be substantially better. Saturated fat as well. Yeah, I think it sounds like you have the opportunity to control all of those variables.
Is that true? Is that true?
Look, I believe whole foods, plant-based diet is really healthy for us. I absolutely don't believe vegan diets, the way they're being sold in the world, are healthy for us. The enormously processed diets, I think, are horrible. like Kim said earlier, probably worse than eating animal-based products. There is a pretty significant opportunity for us to improve cardiovascular health. I think the more important ones than, let's say whether it's cholesterol or even some of the components, TMAOs, I think, we all know that inactivity is one of the biggest reasons for cardiovascular disease. We know stress is an incredible contributor that's just been seeping up and increasing in the world. We know about, clearly the impact of cholesterol or saturated fats. We know that we can decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease by dietary modifications, cutting down smoking. I think what I believe here is we have a pretty significant opportunity to improve meat. If we start understanding the metabolic pathways, if it's phosphatidylcholine, TMAO, being converted in the liver, and we start thinking about ways to minimize that in the cellular agriculture, the way we select cells, so the combinations of cells we select, we are exploring that very actively to decrease the opportunity to say we provide the milieu for the microbiome to be able to then cause this very complex mechanism of causative effect of potential cancers, chronic kidney disease, et cetera. So no one's ever explored that, to be candid. It's going to take some time to prove it, but that's a really strong area of interest for us. The one advantage we have, which is massive, is it takes about 7 years to breed a trait out of an animal. Whereas if we start using cell selection, cell line development processes, it takes us few days to few weeks. So the magnitude of innovation is we're talking about very different paradigms. So I think there's a big opportunity there. So I believe that completely, and it'll probably take a decade or so for all these studies to be done and show that we are improving. But in the meantime, our goal is to be able to put meat that is delicious, guilt-free, substantially similar, has high nutritional density, and start getting people to move to a better production system, and then starting to build the foundation of what can we do with improved health attributes.
So do you guys have a research arm that's actually looking at that is saying how can you modify it and think about the fat content of meat, the stromal fat, as Kim has mentioned in the past? I mean, are you doing that actively?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a pretty active program. We're about 50 plus PhDs, over 140 people, really going after only one purpose. How do we bring meat to the table directly from growing cells? And we use cells that are satellite cells, mesenchymal stem cells, embryonic stem cells, all kinds of lineages of cells that still have an ability to continue to differentiate and proliferate. And then we're looking for combinations of cells with the various fats that come along with it to be able to put in the final product, as well as the quality of proteins that we can put in there. So that's a very active area of investigation. But I think the way to also continue to advance it is connect with a few centers across the world that have substantial experience in these areas and see if there's an interface we can have with them. And that should be coming in the next few years.
Yeah, I was always struck by when you first started the company, you said, vegan curing world hunger. So I want to touch back on that, because what you said, you can make this and really target making meat or food really for more masses than we can right now by having actually heard and trying to be able to feed everybody through meat the way that we're doing it now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, if I can talk very quickly about the process, what we do is we take high quality cells from animals, eggs. Animals don't need to be slaughtered for it. We just need a small biopsy. And then we take cells from that have the ability to continue to self-renew for 50, 60, 70 plus doubling. And we then pair those cells with feed or media, which has a combination of vitamins, amino acids, fatty acids, sugars, water, and growth factors and minerals. And then we put them in a clean environment, which is called a cultivator or akin to a brewery. And we let the cells grow, and there's the biomass of the cells are continue to replicate. They connect with each other, they form the tissues. And then at a certain point, about 3 to 6 weeks out after starting the process, there's enough tissue formation that we are able to harvest it and then form into products that people like to eat. So that's, in a nutshell, the process we can use for meat, poultry, and seafood. When we start thinking about scale, nearly all the food we feed these cells is going to be converted into meat, as opposed to in an animal. The animal has to do lots of things: run around, have babies, heal broken bones, live a long life, right? Calories are being directed for food. So a lot of efficiency of resources. And when we start thinking about greenhouse gas emissions, there's no methane, right? So there's a lot of these benefits that come through at scale. Those are the ones we are targeting with our production systems. We're building a production facility right now in the East Bay, in the Bay Area. That'll be the first demonstration of meat growing under one roof, all the way from the first cells to the meat that's being cooked in front of you, which has never happened before. So we want to be able to show that and demonstrate it. That's the immediate goal for us, to show how we can scale up meat production.
So Kim, does this make you want to not be doing plant-based whole grain diets? Do you think you would try meats like this? Or tell me what have you thought about this nutritional piece of it?
Well, so I obviously, with 9 grandkids, I'm very concerned about the planet. And after hanging around and doing all these vegan conferences, you start to be concerned about animal rights. I mean, who wouldn't? And so when you think about those two issues, it's more than just human health that's at stake here. And of course, it's long-term human plates if we don't have a planet to live on, of course. But I would say that if you're not one of the people who has a cholesterol problem like I do, there may be some benefits, and there would definitely be benefits to those who were not inclined to change their diet. I know the numbers have been small, and I remember reading that there had been a 600% increase in the number of vegans in the United States, but it probably went from minuscule to tiny. It's still we've got a long way to go to try to improve the diets and get information out. We have health literacy issues, so people don't realize that essentially they come into my office with 25 medical problems, 23, 24, 25 of them are actually due to nutrition directly or indirectly. And so we have a lot to accomplish. And I would say that if this is an idea that can provide calories to people, that's not going to be harmful in terms of, particularly the saturated fat, the TMAO we've talked about, then maybe it really is one of the answers to improving particularly cardiovascular health. But it sounds like the cancer stuff too, the cancer relationship to animal products, people don't have enough respect for that. And it's something that it sounds like you, Uma, are really going to impact on.
Yeah, these are all active areas of exploration. I think one thing you said is really important, Kim, which is the opportunity to preserve choice of humans is such an incredible piece that we miss, because I think nearly everybody understands the animal welfare impact, have always done. But the product that we love is delicious. Nearly everybody in the world loves eating meat. And if we can bring that same product to their plates with a process that is much easier, simpler, without the downsides, I think that's the first step. The second step is to how do you make the product better? And that's what you're talking about. And that's really where our eyes are really set on. But one step at a time, you got to get this to scale. There's still some challenges ahead of us. No one's ever produced millions of pounds of meat using cellular agriculture. That's our first goal. Getting there, I think, is going to be a monumental accomplishment. And from there, we start thinking about how do you make that healthier? And I think that's really the trajectory for the next decade of innovation in this field.
So is it right now where you are, is this something that's affordable can go to marketplace, Uma?
It is getting more and more affordable. We're getting closer to getting the product released on the market. We're working with the regulatory agencies in the US, FDA and the USDA, to come and get behind the production process. We're submitting for all the safety requirements, the consumer education for labeling, and also inspection of the production plant. So we're hoping that with regulatory approval, we can put the product out in front of people in the United States in the near future. We'd be ready to go this year or next year to put those products out on the market. When we put them on the market, there will be a premium on the pricing initially, but it's not a premium that is not unusual for us. It's like organic or a little bit, it's higher than organic pricing is what we're going to be targeting initially when we come to market. But ultimately what I see is 5-10 years from now, this is going to be at price parity. And then subsequent to that, it's actually going to be much better, because the resource use and all the calories are going only for meat production. And that's the time to catch up for industrial scale production facilities and capital expenditures to have the volume of production that we need for meat. One thing for our audience to know is the meat consumption right now is about 400 metric tons, or 750 billion pounds of meat globally. That's an enormous amount of meat to produce. So for us to have an impact, my goal is by 2030, have to the field has to grow to have at least 5 to 10% of the global meat production in the next 30 years, get to 20 to 30%, and then by 100 years from now, nearly all meat could be produced directly from animal cells.
So, Kim, how does that all sound to you in terms of, I mean, I'm sure you can think of a lot of questions in terms of how to make this the innovation from a nutrition standpoint. But as a cardio nutritionalist, how does all this, the meat production, sound to you? And what are you thinking?
Right. Well, again, my big concern would be about the persistence of cholesterol in it, but all of the other things that we know of, and it's a very discrete list. That is the saturated fat, which apparently can be controlled, the TMAO we talked about, the heme iron. If you're growing it without blood, then the amount of heme iron, which seems to be one of the major issues of eating particularly red meat, is not going to be there. And so it sounds like it would have a huge impact on human health. Is it optimized? Is it going to be as good as a whole food plant-based diet? We would have to do the studies to show that. And we know that there are some people who have cholesterol, but we're all good friends with Paul Ridker, and he's been trying to tell us that cholesterol is about half of it and inflammation is the other half. So if you could actually eat an animal product without developing a high sensitivity CRP, and which probably has more to do with the microbiome. So if we're really having an option that does not make the GI dysbiotic, so to speak, and with all the chemical downsides, perhaps that it isn't going to be a major issue. I think what we have to make sure that we have the studies and the outcomes, and it sounds like Dr. Valeti is really headed in that direction.
Yeah, one thing I want to add on to that, Kim, is I think whole foods plant-based diet should always stay, but the question is, how much meat should be in that plate? Is it a small amount, moderate amount, or the large amount that is actually in the plate right now, which causes a big problem because 200 pounds of meat per capita in the United States versus 30 pounds per capita in India. Very big difference. Do we need that much meat on the table? I think there's two things we are talking about. We should never get rid of whole foods plant-based diet in the plate.
So, I have a question. There are these plant-based meats that are sold in the store, right? How does that differ from what you're doing? I mean, and I just want to make sure you're not in the stores right now, right? You're still in development phase, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. We are looking to get regulatory approval. Like I said, this field's only been 5 years old, so there's no cultivated meat product that's available for sale in the United States. There's one company that's just selling cultivated chicken in Singapore, but it's not in the United States. But I think it's going to come in the near future. Plant-based proteins or plant-based products that are meat alternatives have been on our shelves for decades, right? No question about that. But there's been an increased awareness of how animal welfare, environmental impact. So, and also the taste of those proteins or meat alternatives have been improving. Now, in order to improve taste, I think there's a lot of things that are added in there. The question, it's an open question if that's still going to have an impact on reducing hypertension or cardiovascular disease. That's not been answered for sure, but those products are tastier now than they were a decade ago. And I think there's also price on those products is coming down to be closer to conventional meat. And keep in mind, we subsidize conventional meat enormously in the United States. It is so much cheaper to go buy a hamburger than buying a meat alternative, whether it's made out of plants or mycelia or algae. So much more cheaper. I think those are getting cheaper. On the health impact, I think Kim probably has more thoughts on it.
Well, I want to make one other comment. I love the idea of being able to feed the masses, like you said, cure, because one of the things I'm interested in is health equity. And I think one of the issues that, Kim, you brought up was the idea of food security. So the idea that we can produce so that nobody has to go hungry and potentially get nutritional food, I think is very appealing. So Kim, do you have any comment on that before I sort of open it up to questions, from our audience?
Well, the segue from what Dr. Valeti said, I mean, it was really important. That is, not sure everybody heard it. Food subsidies. That is, there are products out there that have, like, I won't name the name, but something that everyone really likes, that has 14 different compounds in it that are subsidized by our U.S. government.
Wow.
And those products, with all of the refined, saturated, all of the stuff, actually hurts human health. So then the Congress has to allocate more money to Medicare and to Medicaid to try and cover this. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to continue to do that. But that political statement aside, we struggle with the food subsidies making unhealthy food more available, so that those who are struggling socioeconomically end up gravitating toward those types of food. And we talk about food deserts. One of the problems of food deserts is just economics 101. It's supply and demand. If people are demanding the lower quality foods, that's what's going to be in the mom and pop store. And so we really have to start with the education. And the better stores will come if people are going to buy those kinds of things. And the more they buy them, the less the expense is going to be. It's just an issue of volume. And so we really need to change the entire system with education and with data, so that people understand what's healthy and what's not healthy, and be able to make some choices that are going to stop the diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and the like.
We have some questions from our audience. I'm going to start opening it up to that. And the first is, I'm going to invite Dr. Kaushik Reddy. He was mentioning, since we were talking about subsidized meat, he was talking about telling us in the chat that we should check out the book Meat-Nomics. And so I thought maybe if he had a comment or a question, Dr. Reddy, can you?
Hi, hey guys, this is Kaushik Reddy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Hey, good.
Thanks for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. I completely lost track of this. I just got back from a bike ride. Sorry, but my calendar alerted me. Yes, food subsidies is such a major issue. If you look, I just recently started reading this book called Meat-Nomics, and it literally goes by, dime by dime in terms of how, in all practicality, we are actually paying for our sickness in this country. And then God, God forbid, should we get sick, the first question is, do you got an insurance? So it's really kind of an eye-opening book that pretty much everybody in medicine should read. And but along those lines, in terms of Meat-Nomics and in terms of how the society is programmed to think, for most part, I ask this to my patients when we say, source of protein, somehow we have been programmed across the world. Source of protein means that us consciously allowing the rotting of the dead flesh of another animal inside of our body. How did we get to be that way? Right? And how did we get to be that way as a culture and a society in 21st century? And how to change that? And so along those lines, the question that I have for Uma is that, based on your research, where is the society today in terms of receptiveness to eat, quote unquote, a food that is grown in a lab? What are your surveys, and what are your research, and where the market is? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kaushik. Absolutely great question. When we started this 5 years ago, we were the first company in this space, and none of the research existed. But since then, there's a wealth of research and publications, peer-reviewed publications, our own surveys that have been showing, without a question, that there is significant interest in people wanting to try cultivated meat, adopt cultivated meat, or completely replace their existing meat with cultivated meat. And these are anywhere from 50% to 87% interest in the global demographic. These studies have been done in the United States and also outside the US. There's also a generational influence. Under 50, really strong signal. But over 50 also is a really strong signal, because for some early adapter technologies, or presumably disruptive technologies, you're hoping for 2 to 3% of market interest initially. We have very high double-digit interest across all generations, Gen X, Gen Y, the boomers, and people who work in slaughterhouses. So I think the acceptance is there. The moment that is actually the most critical in this whole thing is tasting. Like, people come into the office, we've done thousands of tastings in our kitchen, but they come into the office with a lot of thoughts, questions, skepticism, maybe a little bit of fear. But it just starts, you can start seeing it vanishing when they first see the raw meat. Then they start seeing it cooking on the grill and the aromas filling the kitchen. They're like, okay, if you're a well-calibrated meat eater, you absolutely know when meat's on the grill. And then they take the bite very hesitantly. Once they start chewing into it, that's when they immediately realize this is meat. This is not a meat alternative. They've not tasted anything like this before, except maybe their chicken they had just before they came in. That's the magical moment, and we have to get that in front of consumers. All the surveys are great to have. Very high level of interest for all the reasons: environmental, animal welfare, and health are the top 3 reasons. But I think ultimately it's a consumer taste. So I think we're going to win this on taste.
So we still have a few more questions. I'm going to ask Marcy Frackwar Snow she was asking about the plant-based meat that was sold in the stores. I asked you that earlier. She wants to know what's actually in it. Marcy, do you want to ask your question, or is there anything, did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, there's so many plant-based foods that we see in stores, in restaurants, and you look at it and they don't say what's the ingredients, how much preservatives. So my question is, what is in it and how does that affect us?
So let me just, Dr. Valeti probably got a wonderful biochemical answer. I would just keep it to the simple stuff that we put in our ACC AHA guidelines. That is, I look for sodium and look for saturated fat. We know there's not going to be cholesterol in there if it's not an animal product, but we do have concern about heme iron, which is in some of the products or one of them. But if you're using saturated fat from coconut oil, sure, shorter chain saturated fat, maybe not as bad as the animal laden saturated fat, but it still is dyslipidemic. And so, and the sodium content, I know it makes it more attractive, but it's not really good for human health, particularly if you have a tendency toward high blood pressure. So I kind of simplifies it down to those things: saturated fat, heme iron, and sodium. But I'd love to hear what Uma has to say.
Look, like I said earlier, I think the products that we have for meat alternatives are so much better now, much more tastier. They're understanding a consumer, meeting a consumer where they are. I think we have to meet people where they are. So I think the meat alternative products have improved a lot. There are questions around sodium, which are higher than conventional meat. There's questions around processing and how the ingredients are extracted to get the more concentrated protein in the process it gets there. I don't have an answer for you saying if it's healthy or healthier. I think it's tastier than they used to be before. And if people are adopting them more, I think it's because of the awareness of the downsides of conventional meat production, and that it tastes good enough to be able to say it's going to be on my plate. I don't know if they're making their choice to make themselves healthy yet.
No, but I'm with Marcy. I think the question is, what's in it? I mean, they don't really say what the ingredient. To me, that's kind of scary. I don't want to eat something that I don't even know what's in it. I don't care if it's an alternative, because for all I know, it's garbage that they've packaged into an alternative. It just doesn't make any sense.
I think for Kim, you might know more on this, but they're all on the ingredient label. The USDA requires and FDA requires you to have an ingredient label on the back. And majority of them, the first ingredient is either soy protein, pea protein, or some type of mycelia. I think those are the top 3. There's other ones that are using sorghum proteins and fava bean proteins and lupin protein, and then it goes off after that into some binders, which could be, again, plant-based binders. It could be gluten, it could be methyl cellulose, and then there's vitamins they add to supplement, and colors and beet juice, and in one case, recombinant hemoglobin.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think you guys gave some good idea as to how to even look at the packaging, because I'm not sure everybody's looking at the packaging for sodium and saturated fat and all of that. So all of a sudden, I think we're going to pay a little bit better attention to that. We have another question, Dr. Abdullah. This is for, he has a question for you, Uma. Dr. Abdullah, do you want to ask your question about eating foods with other cellular meats?
Well, when people will consume this cellular derived meat, they will also eat other foods along with it. And my concern or my question is, what is the impact or the interaction of these other foods with the cellular derived meat that they are going to eat? It's not that people are not going to just put this cellular derived meat in their plate. So when it comes to the outcomes, it's going to matter what else they're eating as well.
Yeah, the way we are developing it, Dr. Abdullah, is it's essentially a meat for meat substitute. If there's any meat dish that you're eating right now, for instance, it is, let's say we've done beef meatballs, we've done chicken tenders, we've done chicken breast, fried chicken, we've done grilled duck or duck l'orange. So any dish that you're cooking, it's made to actually basically be a substitute. We expect the nutritional profile to be substantially similar. There will be, well, I think on the saturated fat, we'll have significantly less saturated fat than conventional meat. There will still be cholesterol. There will be the usual, high density protein that's available through conventional animal meats. We'll have high density protein available. So I'm not expecting adverse interactions of food. I thought your question was more towards, can this be kosher? Can this be halal? Can these combinations actually work? There's a really active discussion happening among the religious scholars about how can this be halal and how can this be kosher.
No, I wasn't even going there. I know my name is Abdullah, but it engenders many terrorist thoughts and extremist religious thoughts, but I was not there at all.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I look, apologies if you thought that I didn't see the name, but what I'm talking about is I get this question a lot about food interactions, and mostly it's about kosher and halal. It's a very active conversation happening in this field. And I'm talking about what will happen if, for instance, India, where beef is not actually eaten by 70% of the population, what if suddenly beef comes without being slaughtered? What happens there? That's not a conversation that's happening. What happens in the Middle East when there's products that potentially are not kosher or halal, but can be because of the production technique? What happens there? Suddenly we can open 1.1 to 1.2 billion people in the world to be able to access nutritional products that they have not been able to access. So it's a very large opportunity, and there's a lot of conversations happening about how these combinations could work.
So thank you so much. We have several other questions. I think Dr. Joseph has a question, and then I think Dr. Ivan Anderson has a question, and then Dr. Sarah Hansen. So let's start with Dr. Joseph.
Hey, Dr. Williams, how are you?
Good to see you, Jake.
Good to see you as well. Thank you, Dr. Itchhaporia, for having this discussion on nutrition, which is so important. My whole trajectory of training changed after I was fortunate to be trained under Dr. Williams. My question is first of all twofold. Actually twofold. One is, I was fortunate to have had the exposure of training under Dr. Williams, and that's how my trajectory of looking at cardiovascular disease changed. What is the ACC, or what can the ACC do to make nutrition, lifestyle medicine, whole food, plant-based diet more part of the curriculum, that more fellows who are coming out of fellowship are exposed to this? For example, can the board exams be have a bigger focus on nutrition? Because as of now, the focus seems to be on the latest stents and the latest indication for TAVR. But is there anything that ACC can do to get more fellows interested, or at least aware of the tremendous impact of a whole plant-based diet on cardiovascular disease? I mean, just yesterday I just saw a study of a hot dog reduces your lifespan by 33 minutes. I mean, that's how impactful this is. And the second question is, and I'm sorry, you can go ahead. And the second question would be, I'm actually in Tulsa right now. I've got an interventional cardiology practice, and I'm also board certified in lifestyle medicine, and I want to start a lifestyle medicine program. I have all the equipment, the facilities, the staff, the everything, but I have no reimbursement model. When I bring this up to the hospital, they say, how are you going to bill for this? So is there any plan from the ACC, given its impact that it has in BC, to work with the ACLM to have a sustainable reimbursement model?
Kim, do you want to answer that first before I'll say something?
I would really want to hear because the current president is in control. So I can say that probably the lasting legacy of my presidency will be the wonderful nutrition work group, and Dipti has been on that There's so many publications coming out of it. But we're basically summarizing the literature, and we stimulate each other to do some research, but we need to do a lot more of that and a lot of publications. And sure, we have, a lot of plant-based nutrition in our newest set of guidelines for prevention, but we need it to be, throughout all of our disease-related guidelines. And then, as you're saying, AJ, we really need to change the curriculum. So that's the COCATS, I guess that would be COCATS 5. And I really would love to see, where that's going with ACC leadership being thoughtful and knowledgeable in this area. What can we actually do to train the next set of fellows? Because, as I'm always saying, the leading cause of death of cardiologists is heart disease, and that has to stop. And so, and the best way to do that is for us to focus more on prevention as a college.
Well, we're definitely seeing an increase in this in interest in terms of this whole cardio nutrition, right? That's why the cardio nutrition podcast, we have a ACC prevention section that is a great place to start. AJ, you seem like you would be perfect for that section, and certainly rise up to the leadership within that. So I think that there are mechanisms for that. And then in terms of what you're asking about reimbursements and all that, really that's at the heart of value-based care, right? You're not going to make positive outcomes. Therefore, why do you think we haven't been able to make the kind of positive outcome changes? Because if we don't target this really nutritional, and I think that's all part of the bigger picture of the health equity piece that I'm talking about. Food is certainly a part of that, nutrition is part of that. And I believe that until we achieve some of those targets in health equity, we're never going to really get to value-based care. So I do think that's hand in hand. We have a health equity task force that's actually looking into this. We have a strategic plan. The board just met recently and has said that we're going to adopt health equity within all of our strategic priorities. And so there's going to be a lot more work. So I think this is an exciting time. That's why I thought this coffee was an exciting time to talk about nutrition. So I thank you so much for bringing that up. I want to go on to Dr. Ivan Anderson.
Yes, thank you very much, and appreciate you taking my question. So my question is more on a personal one, and I guess primarily for Dr. Williams. So a couple of years ago, I adopted a whole foods plant-based diet. My wife is an OBGYN, and we have 3 children. She had gestational diabetes at one point in time. And so we shifted all of our animal fat intake to plant-based proteins and carbs. And her A1C went up from 5.4 to 5.6. She was originally born in Argentina, so it's on the backdrop of, meat consumption. But she adopted it very readily, and now I'm kind of struggling with the situation and just looking at a lot of the meals on your website. They're very similar to what we're eating, and there is this shift from fats to carbs, and that's a conversation that I'm having a difficult time navigating personally. And when I think about, hey, I counsel my patients and they have subclinical coronary atherosclerosis, and I'm going to put them on statin therapy, and that's going to elevate their A1C, and now they need to keep that down. What's the answer to that? Is there a place where, some of this is activity? Should we, we're active people, we're not overweight. Most of my patients probably are not in that same situation. What is the conversation there?
So several things, but one, you hit the nail on the head. It's about activity. And so my little acronym for the subclinical or clinical or post-event atherosclerosis is, I call it SAVE. Sounds really good. SAVE stands for statin, aspirin, vegan diet, and exercise. And the exercise is a big component, because it turns out that high-dose statins, which is all over our guidelines, does induce diabetes if a person particularly has metabolic syndrome or prediabetes. And so we've got to get them moving, and we've got to get them get the central obesity down. And then I just don't see this elevation in blood sugar with the statins. The other side that you mentioned, I would encourage you to look at Salim Yusuf's PURE trials, where they came out specifically and saying that fat was safer than carbohydrates. And saying, Salim, wasn't it refined carbohydrates? And if you look at the methods, it did specifically talk about refined carbohydrates. So a few months ago, they actually published a follow-up study distinguishing refined carbohydrates from whole food, or from whole grains. And the mortality difference is huge. So I would say for you and your family, take a look at how many of those grains, how much of those carbs were actually refined. And if there are whole grains, then we switch more to more vegetables and a little bit on the less on the grain side. But every study that's looked at whole grains has shown an improvement in mortality and better metabolism as well.
So I think Dr. Silverstein has a comment about education and diet. So Dr. Silverstein, are you on?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. I've been in the vegan direction since 1970. And the key word that I try to teach my patients is, as implied, is unprocessed. So you can add to that whole grains or vegetables. Just parenthetically, I do not recommend any form of potato. People want to argue about sweet potatoes, but I don't recommend any form of potato or banana because the carbohydrate comes in too quickly, similar to refined carbohydrates. Now, nothing I say is ever. At the present time, I take the position that being 90% vegan is the right idea. Being completely vegan too often becomes more of a religion than a medical practice. So I believe in a little bit of flexibility, humility might be the proper word. Then I start discussing with patients about the jaw and the human biology. We don't have fangs and claws, which carnivores do. We cannot digest rotten meat the way all carnivores can. We have an enzyme to meet plant-based foods right in our salivary glands where food first enters, amylase. There are a whole series of things that point to the fact that the human body is probably essentially vegan. And that takes me back to that word humility. I don't think we should be rigid about anything. On the other hand, I think we should be clear about what we might call biochemistry and physiology. As far as fat goes, I just read this study the other day. I don't remember where it came from. Might have been Cleveland Clinic. What they found was a high-fat diet resulted in increased oxygen and nitric oxide production in the intestines, which gave rise to the wrong type of microbiome, which then resulted in, as already discussed, the TMAO, atherosclerotic proclivity. And then I also just recently saw an article about how the Mediterranean diet was improved if you recommended plant-based protein to replace animal protein. So,
Dr. Silverstein, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. So do you have a specific question? Otherwise, I have several other people that are waiting to ask a question.
Okay, fine. One last comment. If you're interested in nutritional education, I have an extensive website that discusses this. It's called the Preventive Medicine Center.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Hansen, Sarah Hansen, she had a question for Dr. Williams.
Dipti, before you do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, because U.S. News and World Report picked the Mediterranean diet, and those wonderful people. They had a wonderful 2018 New England Journal of Medicine. And it's a major problem. They picked it as the #1 diet based on the 30% reduction in heart attack, stroke, or death. But the authors were very clear. The New England Journal was very clear. It does not decrease cardiovascular mortality. It does not decrease heart attack, and doesn't decrease total mortality. It only decreased stroke. So if I was a neurologist, I'd be jumping up and down. But as the cardiologist, this is not the diet that I would want my patients to be on. So I'm glad Dr. Silverstein, you mentioned the Mediterranean diet, because there's a lot of misconceptions about that particular paper. So, what you mentioned is their pro-vegetarian publication saying that if you were doing a plant-based vegetarian diet, or a vegetarian diet, if you want to call it that, there was a 42% decrease in mortality. So again, plants, not animals.
Great. Do we have Dr. Hansen on the line?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to say thank you for doing this. So my question, I am currently a pediatric preventive cardiology fellow, and we see a lot of patients in our clinic who have the low health literacy, like you mentioned, but also just low nutritional literacy. And we work very closely with dietitians to make some changes for these patients. And my question for you is, in your experience, have you found any small changes that have high impact that have been easy for patients to make in terms of plant-based diets or improving their diet?
So I doing this all full time. I kind of talk about the 3 T's. I spend my time with the patient. I try to get a team of people surrounding them who talk with them consistently about their lifestyle, and as Dr. Azuma said, meeting them where they are. And then I actually give them tools. And one of the best tools that we have right now is the Association of Black Cardiologists plant-based diet that is actually on their website. You can go there and download it. It's 24 pages of colorful, dietary information, and giving people tools that they can actually go to the grocery store. And I tease them a little bit and say, you go to the grocery store, you go to the produce aisle, and when you're done in the produce aisle, you go to the cash register, and it seems to work pretty well. And I would say that we have to be supportive. We have to continually refine the data, because we know now more than we did, 3 years ago about what's good for human health in this arena. And so I like that idea of being humble that Dr. Silverstein was talking about, because, we're always going to have to morph things to make people better.
So, I'm going to ask you a question. So now, having been a cardiologist, practicing cardiologist, taking this journey to become somebody that is now running this big food company, tell me some of the lessons you've learned, and what are some of the things that you're thinking about going forward?
Sorry, quite a few lessons, but if I pick 3 of them, one is I think being a cardiologist gives us an intrinsic advantage to take on big challenges and big ambitions. I think, cardiologists in the medical community are very specifically equipped to take on things. I think that's part of our nature. That's part of us unwilling to give up and saying patient always comes first. We're going to make sure that this patient is going to live. They're not going to die under my watch. I think there's something very special about that led us to innovate, whether it's lytics or PTCA or valvular disease or statins. There's something very special about cardiology. So I think that's helped me a lot to take the next step. The second thing I'd say is, it was really hard to give up cardiology full time to do this. But I think the opportunity to impact on a much larger level if I continued practicing cardiology the next 20, 30 years, maybe I would have saved 2,000 or 3,000 lives, but just the opportunity to impact billions and trillions of lives, that felt really risky, scary. That leap of faith was incredibly challenging. But looking back, I would do it all over again. I'm very thankful to one person who said, Uma, don't look back. And I think that's seemed like a very simple thing. Walking past him in a corridor, he said, don't look back. That's a really important message when you're taking on big leaps of faith. The third one is I absolutely would not have been able to do it without the support of my wife and kids. I quit cardiology, and so she said, why don't you move to California with the kids? I'll continue my practice in Minnesota. I'll fly back and forth. So she flew back and forth for 4 years to keep the practice and support us. Wow. And the kids were like, Dad, you've been talking about this for 10 years. Why are you not doing it? So that became the permission and call to action. So those are my 3 lessons: a strong, supportive family, community of cardiologists teaching me every single time, taking the big risks, and then not to look back.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of 2 things. I mean, we could certainly have had a long discussion about how, how couples that are 2 professional couples manage all of this. And that would be a fascinating story in itself. But I will tell you that I think that your story is amazing. I agree about the impact. When I became president, somebody said to me, be bold. If not now, when? Then I think that you became bold and you did this. And I think, Kim, you can relate to that sentiment also, right? With some of the things that you've done. I'm going to give you a last comment before I do our closing comments. But this has been really a great, terrific session. There's certainly a lot more we can talk about, but we time constraints in the morning. So any closing comments, Kim?
Well, sure. From my point of view, growing up in the inner city of Chicago, seeing the 21% higher mortality rate in African Americans, it's got to direct us more toward health equity. And I'm so glad to hear that the college is moving in that direction. If we think about the United States being the only high income country where cardiovascular disease is still the leading cause of death, if it wasn't for the African American difference, it wouldn't be the leading cause of death. So I'm making that leap to continue to try to fight for the inner cities, and I'm glad the college is joining us. If we could fix that problem, if we could just reduce it, and that's with lifestyle, exercise, diet, and adherence to medications and early recognition disease, we would actually save the finances of Medicare that's about to go broke. We would stop all the massive amount of money that's spent on dialysis. And the fact of the matter is, if we're not really serious about that, then we're not helping our families, we're not helping our community, we're not helping our country. And ultimately, as the discussion went today, we're not helping the planet. So I don't see any other choice than for us to focus on prevention. As Dr. H.A. Joseph was saying, we should be doing this. Sure, it's great to do interventions, but we need to be really turning off the faucet and not just mopping up the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. So thanks to my guests, Drs. Kim Williams and Dr. Uma Valeti, for joining us for our virtual ACC coffee table today. You'll be able to find this recording of these sessions on ACC's YouTube page and learn who's going to chat with us next time. By the way, the next time we're going to have Madeline Musselman, who is a two-time Olympic gold medalist in water polo, and we're going to talk about team dynamics. I think it'll be a really exciting session, and you're going to want to join us for that. So I think we're going to lift our coffee mugs, all of us, and say, may your coffee be strong and your day be full. May we help, may we heal, and may we advance heart care worldwide together. So thank you all for stopping by, and see you next time.
Thank you, Dipti.
Thank you so much.